Hi, guys. September 9th, 2023 meeting of the Money Masters Investment Club. I'm Dr. Robinson. Not a lot to talk about today. We're going to do our financials like we normally do, and then three or four other slides just to look at, but not a lot of talking with them, just to kind of show you the state of the U.S. economy and some things that kind of make me worried about the future. So having said that, let's get going. So the first thing, the NAV. The NAV ending as of yesterday, Friday the 8th, $33.71. So again, we're making pretty good headwind, pretty good success with what we're doing with these long charts. So I'm pretty happy with the way things are going. So overall, I'm going to continue getting better and getting more and more used to these long charts and holding trades for longer. I think it's working out to our benefit. So pretty good week. And I think hopefully next week will be another good week on top of it. We can keep this thing going. Some other little things to look at. Just wanted to show you the strategic petroleum reserve, the amount of oil that we keep in reserve for emergencies, for wars and things of that nature. And I only bring this up because if you've paid any attention to the price of oil recently, the price of oil has gone up significantly in the last 2 weeks. Now, it's mostly as a result of an agreement between Saudi Arabia and Russia to drive the price of oil to $100 a barrel. They're doing a pretty good job of it. A few weeks ago, oil had been trading in a range of between $68 and $72 a barrel. As of yesterday, the price of oil was at $88, $89 a barrel. So the price of oil has come up significantly because of what they're going to do. And remember, Joe Biden, in an effort to try to fool the American people into thinking the gas prices were actually coming down under his administration, he took oil out of the petroleum reserves to kind of help bring down the price of gas at the pump. Well, remember, what he said is it was a good deal because he was going to be able to replace that oil in the future at a much lower price. Well, when he took that oil out, that oil had a base price when you convert it to gas of about $2.83. The price of gas is a little bit higher than that now. So the price of gas is higher now than when he did it. But also, if oil does in fact get up to $100 a barrel, like the Russians and the Saudi Arabians want it to do, the price of oil is going to go to, or price of gas rather, is going to go back up to $4.50, close to $5 a gallon again. This is going to backfire on Joe Biden big time. But also from a national security point of view, if a war broke out today, and by the way, this number is from August 23rd, and of course we're now in September. This number is actually a little lower. It's about 43 days today. If a war broke out today, we've got enough oil in reserves to last about 43 days for a conflict. After the 43rd day, we'd have to start going to Saudi Arabia or other countries and start begging for oil so that we can conduct a war. So at the end of the day, this was not a smart thing he did, but kind of shows you how politicians tend to think short term, and they never think about the consequences of some of the stupid things that they do. This is another thing that kind of shows you the short-term mentality of politicians and even the Federal Reserve to some extent. As you know, interest rates have been going up. Historically, just to kind of give you a little background, historically, whenever somebody went to get a mortgage to buy a house, the lender generally required the amount of debt required to cover the cost of the house to be no more than, say, 30%. That was a maximum, by the way. A lot of banks were less than that. But generally, the amount of debt had to be less than 30% of your income. So if you went to a bank to borrow money to buy a house and it was going to take, say, 35% of your income to pay for the house, the bank would say no to you because that's, the much greater likelihood of a foreclosure or bankruptcy, and then the bank is going to end up owning the house and all that sort of thing. So they generally just would deny those kinds of applications. Well, with interest rates where they're at right now, the average person buying a house today, if you were to buy one today with interest rates where they're at, mortgage rates are a little about 7.2. But if you were to do that house today, based on today's current market prices of houses, is going to cost you about 40% of your income. I'm going to tell you right now, guys, from an economic point of view, it is not sustainable. You might be able to get away with it for a year or two. somebody's using 40% of their income to pay for their housing costs. And by the way, this is just housing. This doesn't include insurance or taxes or upkeep, maintenance, and all the other stuff that goes with a house. Because you know that houses are expensive to own. When a roof leaks, you got to replace a roof, and that's not cheap. So when you talk about somebody at 40%, they're just a couple of years away from a foreclosure or a bankruptcy or something bad happening. Now, again, you can get away with it for a couple of years if the Fed can lower interest rates in time. But I don't see anything on the horizon that's going to allow interest rates to come down anytime soon. In fact, we got some inflation numbers just last week when it came to the ISM numbers, and they were up 0.2. So inflation is actually going the wrong way again. It's actually starting to go back up as opposed to going down. The Fed is not going to be able to lower interest rates anytime soon. In fact, that's why the market kind of sold off a little bit this week, because when that news came out, it kind of freaked everybody out. Everybody had thought that maybe the Fed was going to get to 2% inflation much sooner than they expected, and it turns out. Now, it could be that that number was an anomaly. Maybe it was from old info, or maybe there's going to be a revision to it because the government constantly does revisions on things. So there's a possibility of that. But as of right now, I don't see the Fed being able to lower interest rates anytime soon. And by anytime soon, I don't see it happening anytime in the next year or so. And there's a lot of people really believing the Fed's going to lower interest rates either this year or early next year. I don't think it's going to happen. In fact, I still believe we've got a couple of more meetings here before the end of the year. We've got one coming up next week. So with the September meeting, I don't believe the Fed's going to raise interest rates in the September meeting. But the meeting after that, the one in November, I think they are going to raise interest rates now. So I think as of right now, especially with that ISM number, now we've got some other data points. We've got some good data points coming out this week. In fact, we got PCE and CPI numbers and stuff coming out. So when we get those numbers, if they're starting to trend back up, there's a really good chance that in November interest rates are going to go back up. If the numbers go up significantly, by the way, next week, there's a very real possibility that they may raise interest rates in September. I don't see that happening. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I don't even think it's likely, but it's a possibility. So this could actually get worse. Somebody could be going to 42, 43, 44% of their income to cover the cost of housing. It's unsustainable. This is not a good thing. Also wanted to look at debt to GDP. A lot of people are talking about the debt to GDP lately, but there's a couple of different ways to look at debt to GDP. Some people, when they're trying to make people believe that the debt to GDP ratio is not as bad as it looks, they'll do this one. This is called the federal debt held by the public. And when we talk about the debt that's held by the public, we're talking about individuals like you and I, other investors, banks, businesses, families, corporations, states, because they buy treasuries. Anybody who's ever bought a treasury bill, even if you've bought a savings bond for your kid or something, that's considered a public debt or a debt held by the public. Those debts only include those held by individuals other than the government. But remember, the dirty little secret of the United States government is that the government borrows money from the government itself. The government of the United States, the Congress, has been borrowing money from Social Security for decades. Same thing with Medicare. They've been borrowing money from Medicare for decades, from government pensions for decades. The government has promised a lot of federal government employees that they would have a pension when they retired. But they never put any money aside for those pensions. They just simply said, when the pensions come due, we'll borrow money from some other source, maybe China or Japan or somebody, and use that money to pay the pensions. But that causes our debt to go up. So when we talk about GDP to debt, we're always talking about, or I like to talk about the total debt, not just the debt held by the public. So when we talk about, but let's just use their numbers for the moment. If you just look at the numbers of the debt to GDP based on the debt held by the public, not including any federal government debt, we're at 98% of GDP right now. By the way, historically, economists have always thought that when a country goes greater than 60 to 70% of debt to GDP, the country was on the verge of bankruptcy, and in fact, in most cases in history, have gone into bankruptcy within 5 to 10 years. So we're way beyond that. Now, we're not in bankruptcy yet because we have the world reserve currency. We can print as many dollars as we need. But countries like Venezuela and, of course, Germany back in 1920, They weren't the world's reserve currency, so they couldn't print their currency. They couldn't print like we can. They go into bankruptcy. That's actually what kind of set the stage for World War II, with all that happened to Germany in 1921 and 1920. So this is not a good thing. 98% debt to GDP, we're on the verge of bankruptcy. And this, of course, does not include 22.7 trillion owed to Social Security. So the government of the United States borrowed 22.7 trillion from Social Security. They borrowed 35.7 trillion from Medicare. They borrowed 13 trillion from government and military pensions. That's all money that is owed, but it's not included in here. So the real number is significantly above 98%. It's actually closer to 150% right now. But again, let's just go with the numbers they use, trying to trick the American people. The federal debt held by the public, 98% as of 2023. 2033, 115%, 181% by 2053. Let me give you some real numbers though. By 2097, now I know that's a long ways away, what, 74 years? 74 years from now, our debt to GDP, if nothing changes, debt to GDP will be 566%. Now, you might think, well, you're not going to be around. I'm not going to be around in 2097. I would have to be 100 and I don't know, 180 years old to get that far. But still, in 2097, you're going to have kids and grandkids who are still alive. Their debt to income ratio or debt to GDP ratio, unsustainable. America is going to be a third world banana republic because politicians cannot just refuse to do the right thing and stop spending. But it is what it is. So I wanted to show you that. I got one last slide. This one kind of, it's just one of those things you look at and you think, holy smokes. The average payment on a new home now is at a record $2,750 a month. And that's the average. If you go to places like New York or even Miami and San Francisco, Los Angeles, those numbers are much higher. So the average, $2,750 a month. The average house is now renting for a record $1,900 a month. Again, unsustainable. The average new car, this is the one that kind of caught my eye. The average new car payment is now at a record $733 a month. I remember I bought my first house, it cost me $614 a month. And it wasn't, it was quite a while ago, but still, $613 a month for a house. Now they're paying $733 for a car that depreciates on average about 10% a year. So at the end of 10 years, the car is worth zero from a financial point of view. Cars on average just depreciate 10 to 15% a year. So you're going to put $733 a month into a car that in 10 years is worth almost nothing. It's not even worth insuring it anymore in terms of comp and collision because the car's, it's not worth as much as you'll pay in the insurance premium. But look at the used car. The average used car, and this comes, and the average here, by the way, is a car with 63,000 miles on it. That's where the number they're getting from. So a car with 63,000 miles already on it is on average $530 a month. These numbers are unsustainable, folks. And it just kind of goes to how bad, and getting worse. On our next meeting, there were some other things I wanted to kind of show you guys. Delinquencies right now for homes are approaching not record highs because we had some record highs in 2008, but they're getting pretty darn close. We're also seeing delinquencies on credit cards at pretty high rates. They're at about 7%. The norm is 3.5. Normally, about 3.5% of the population are delinquent with their credit card bills. Right now, it's about 7%. So we're starting to see some really huge numbers. That's why banks are starting to close down people's accounts because they got to have more money in reserves to cover the people who are not able to pay their bills back. So there's a lot of things. And by the way, there's estimates right now that as many as 60%, because the student loan program has to, those payments have to start back up in October. So students have another month of no payments. But once those payments go back or come back, it's estimated that 63% of those people are going to be not be able to pay their student loans back. They're going to be in default of their student loans. These are things that do not bode well for the U.S. economy. So when people say the economy is doing great, I don't know what your definition of great is, but none of these things imply that the government or the economy is doing very doing very well at all. But what we need to do collectively, just keep saving money, prepare for the future, and you'll be okay. But these numbers here are unsustainable, and I feel bad for our kids and our grandkids and our great grandkids because they're just going to have a hell of a time trying to pay for stuff. Other than that, guys, that's all I've got for the week. So for those of you joining me on Monday, we'll see you on Monday, and for everybody else, we'll see you on our next meeting in a week or so. Have a good day.